Welcome back to the deep dive. There's this feeling I think we've all had recently. It's a quiet sense that the world is running differently. Not because of one big event, but it's more like a structural vibration. Things just feel fundamentally different.
That's a perfect way to put it, a structural vibration. And that feeling is precisely what the source material we're looking at today is trying to unpack. We're seeing a change in the actual mechanism of social transformation.
So it's not a revolution, not a declaration.
No, nothing so clear. It's more like the fundamental operating premise of society is just being quietly replaced.
And what's driving it, according to the sources, is well, it's us. It's the tiny things, like where you put your attention, what you decide to ignore. So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how those millions of micro choices are actually, rewriting the bigger social order.
Exactly. Thesis 1 in the material basically states that these individual actions, even something like the deliberate placement of silence, all of that is now capable of collectively rewriting the whole structure. When you think about the sheer volume of interaction now, it accumulates.
That's a huge idea. But to really get it, I think we need to step back for a second. Because society didn't used to work that way at all. The control was always top down.
Right. If you go back even a generation, we were running on what the sources call the old OS. It was a classic hierarchy. The social OS dictated everything to the individual OS. The big structures, governments, cultural norms, they were the cause of our behavior.
Okay, so the institutions were the architects. They wrote the code. And the individual was kind of the product, just expected to run the programs they were given.
Precisely. Stability came from the weight of that macro system. If your own personal operating system, your beliefs or your behavior started to deviate, the social OS had ways to correct you. Not just a court case, but even things like a dress code or social etiquette, little corrections.
And that system was incredibly robust for centuries.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this. If it was so strong, what changed? Why can these tiny inputs suddenly overwhelm it?
I think the change is in the relationship itself. It's not a single event. The whole structure has flipped from that top-down enforcement to more of a feedback loop. Individual OS and social OS in constant conversation. This is the interference engine.
And it's not because people suddenly have more willpower or something.
No, that's the key insight. It's not a psychological shift. It's a structural one.
It's the information environment. Just lets all those small decisions add up and reflect back onto the system instantly.
That's the mechanism. And that accumulation, all that subtle energy, it forms a directional force. The sources call it the gradient. It's the slope of change, not a fixed point.
The gradient. Okay, this is where reflective humanism, or RH, really asks you to shift your thinking. We have to stop looking for fixed points.
We do. RH argues that we need to move from that kind of fixed evaluation, is this good, is this bad, to just observing the gradient, which is the speed of change, and the orbit, which is the direction it's heading.
Could you give us an analogy? Because that's a tough shift for our brains to make.
Yeah.
We're wired to judge.
Sure. Think of it like, okay, we're standing on a riverbank. The old model asks you to pick up a rock and evaluate it. Is it a good rock? Is it smooth? That's fixed evaluation. The new model, the gradient model, says, stop looking at the rock, look at the water. How fast is the current? Where is the flow heading?
Ah, okay. So the meaning isn't in the static object anymore. It's in the sustained motion of the current.
Oh.
If we get stuck judging the rocks, we sort of dam up the river. We stop the system from being able to update itself.
You harden the field of generation, as the text put it. You stop the interference. And it's the continuous flow, the collective direction of that current, that is the new social order.
This sounds incredibly decentralized. And this is where it gets really interesting for me. If it's all just fluid gradients and micro choices, what does that new social system even look like? It sounds like chaos.
It's described as a formless order, which is a bit of a paradox, I know. It has no center, no single ideology, and crucially, no finished blueprint. It's always in the process of becoming.
That's a little unsettling. I mean, what happens to the bedrock institutions like law? If the flow is everything, does law become useless?
The role just shifts entirely. The sources say that laws and institutions stop being the cause of our behavior. They become the confirmation layer, the after-the-fact layer. They essentially show up to codify and stabilize what the collective gradient has already decided.
Wow. So the law doesn't tell us what to do anymore. We do it, and then the law comes along later and just signs off on it. That's a massive reversal of power. What about something like ethics?
Same shift. Ethics and justice stop being these fixed external rules. They're redefined as The conditions you need to sustain the interference, they become a technique, not a commandment. The goal is just to keep the update happening smoothly without the system collapsing.
Which brings us to that RH concept, non-interference ethics.
Mm-hmm.
I love that phrase, touching without touching too much. How does that actually work for, say, governing a country?
It's about maintaining distance and transparency. If you touch too much, if the social OS tries to impose rigid top-down control, you stop the resonance. You stop the flow of information. Non-interference ethics would suggest that good governance is just making sure the systems can track the gradient, not trying to overpower it.
So that old school explicit dominance,
Yeah.
it just has to weaken in this environment.
It has to, because there's no fixed center to dominate anymore. The gradient itself, that accumulated momentum of choices and energy, that becomes the dominating force. So the question isn't who is in control, it's what is the collective momentum.
Okay, momentum. But if the whole order is always in flux, surely that should mean constant crisis. We should be seeing huge visible upheavals all the time if the foundation is always moving.
You'd think so, but that's where the MGF-Saracon perspective really adds a critical piece. The sources argue we shouldn't be looking for strong events, those big political shocks, the declared crises. Ironically, those are becoming less common as ways the structure actually changes.
So the tectonic plates are moving, but we're not getting the big earthquake. What do we get instead?
We get persistent, low-intensity, high-frequency microsignals, and these signals just slowly deform the macro social membrane. It's the constant, quiet drip of water, not the sudden flood.
A slow deformation that can become irreversible without anyone ever declaring a state of emergency. That's a huge point.
It is, and this leads to a core distinction RH makes between two ways things can be generated. They call them collision generation and question generation.
Collision generation sounds painful.
It is. A collision is a steep gradient, a shock. It forces a really fast, painful update because all this pressure is built up and hits a fixed point. It returns pain or heat to the world. Think of the 2008 financial crisis. A massive, painful collision, high cost, very rapid change.
And the alternative is question generation.
Right. Question generation is a gentle gradient. The act of sustained, sincere inquiry, just asking the question, keeps the field open. It lets the update happen continuously, incrementally, so the pain is minimized. It's the difference between a sudden regime change and, say, a 50-year evolution in our consensus on human rights.
So it's like choosing the pace of the current. It seems like the question is the more ethical choice about how we let society deform.
It's about focusing on the form of the gradient. And RH says we are all constantly choosing which form of generation we're contributing to with our own micro-behavior.
Okay, this is fascinating. So let's bring this home for the person listening right now. If society is being built by this, this resonance between our own internal OS and the external world, what is our role in all this?
Well, the sources end on these really foundational questions, like, are we primarily agents of change trying to push updates through? Or are we more like observational points with a gradient, where our main task is to just tune our own internal OS and watch the collective movement?
And that ties right into responsibility. Because my choices are so small and decentralized, where does my responsibility for the whole social OS even begin?
Yeah.
It's a really blurry line.
It is, and that's why the practice of contemplation becomes so important. But RH defines it not as just passive thinking. It's the active process of re-examining how you see, calibrating your own observer's stance.
So if observing always changes the thing being observed,
Mm-hmm.
contemplation is how we make sure our observation is contributing to that gentle question generation, not just more collisions.
It's the internal work that lets us sustain the interference without generating all that pain. It helps us ask, at what resolution do I need to be paying attention to spot a runaway dynamic before it becomes a crisis?
We're really moving from a world built on fixed rules to one that's defined by dynamic orbits and evolving gradients.
Powered by the interference between our individual and social realities, order is temporary, ethics is a technique, and maybe your most powerful tool is just the quality of your attention.
And if thought itself is no longer judged by proof, but by its resonance in the system, that leaves us with a final thought for you to take with you.
Yeah.
What structural forms, what ideas, what habits are we holding on to right now that are blocking that necessary gentle gradient of change? And what are we willing to let go of for future generations to quietly update?